I've interviewed a lot of app developers over the years, and it's always an interesting chat to have with another nerd, about nerdy stuff, because I'm a nerd myself. However, in the case of app developers that are giving their stuff away for free, I'm mostly curious about why they're doing that. Why are they giving their stuff away for free? And when I asked that question to Jatin Chowdhury from ChowDSP, I got an answer that included stuff about licensing issues. And I was expecting to get the same answer from the guy behind Neon Silicon, which is the company behind the free apps we're having a look at in this haQ attaQ Docutorial. But it turns out that I was completely wrong. And if you stick with me, you'll hear all about it. So, to start, I thought it would be prudent to actually introduce you to the guy behind Neon Silicon.
I'm Rob Abernathy, and I've been developing for Apple's systems for a while now. I used to develop under the name Music Unfolding, and the stuff now that's under Neon Silicon is basically ports of everything that was done before under Music Unfolding.
All right, so far, Rob has published 6 apps on iOS.
Actually, it's 7. There's one hiding there on the right. Yeah.
And they're all of the effect or processor type. So the type of plugin that you load up as an AUV3 plugin inside an AUV3 host. And all of these plugins are completely free. Now, the interesting thing here is that all of these apps have had a previous life, but I'll let Rob tell you about it after we've had a look at Spirangle. Now, the thing I like the most about Neon Silicon effect apps is that even though these effects are based upon conventional effect types such as delay, reverb, chorus, and filters and stuff like that, the effects themselves are not that conventional in how they're set up. And that, of course, includes Spirangle here, the first app I want to have a look at. Now, this is sort of a filtered tap delay. It's got 3 boxes in the middle here with 3 filter stages, and then it's got levels over here and tempo and effect over here. Now, the way that you fine-tune and fine-adjust stuff is by actually tapping on a box to open it up like this. And inside Neon Silicon apps, the way that you control stuff is by selecting it by tapping on it. And as you can see down here, the fader or slider changes. So you tap on a parameter and then you slide this thing back and forth to actually set the value. Same goes for all of these parameters. Now, you go back over here, and in the case of Spirangle, you don't have to set your parameters yourself. You can actually just press these boxes here and they will randomize everything. And that makes it very interesting because this way you can get unexpected results. As you hear, you can get some wild effects out of it. And if you happen to do a randomization run that you don't like and you want to jump back, then this thing actually has an undo button over here that you can just back up as much as you want. I love this effect because there's so much fun to be had with just pressing randomization options, but whenever I want to fine-tune something, I can just do that.
Originally, they were only on the desktop on the Mac. That goes all the way back to 2003, 2004, I think. So when OS X was brand new. And then a few years back, I got interested in the iPad and how it would be for a music platform. So I decided to port some of them over just so I could use them on the iPad and see how it worked and try to figure out how user interfaces worked with music on the iPad, which is kind of the part I'm most interested in, is how the UI works. And so can't remember, it's probably a couple of years now, I decided to port the iOS versions back to the Mac. And so now, bizarrely, I'm looking at porting the iOS versions to this, which is the Steam Deck, because I'm wondering how it's going to work for the same kind of thing.
So, are you a gamer?
I'm like totally casual. My son's a pretty heavy gamer. I mean, I'm having fun with it as a gaming device, yes. But as a portable device, it's more open and it's like a full-blown Linux-based system underneath it. And so I think it has some potential. It has some limitations too because it's bigger and bulkier than like an iPad would be. But it sits there screen-wise about in the space of like an iPad mini. And so I think it has some potential to play with.
So here we have Nessie xTrem, and it's a tremolo effect, but it is a very special one because, first of all, it's a duo channel tremolo, so you can have one setting for the right channel and one setting for the left channel. Not only that, you have two different ways of doing this tremolo effect thing. There's a VCA, aka amp tremolo effect in here, that does pretty much what a normal tremolo effect would do. But then there's also a low pass gate tremolo effect in here. And you can, of course, combine both of them. Now that doesn't sound too special, but what is special is that you can get some very unconventional tremolo effect patterns out of this one. Very much thanks to the fact that you can FM modulate the waveforms. Look at that. That doesn't look like a normal modulation waveform, does it? And I just find that very interesting. It's not something I would use to create conventional effects at all. I mean, I pretty much like it when my tremolo effects are very standard-like, but with this one, it's fun to just experiment and create stuff that you usually wouldn't make. So left and right channels here with their own waveforms and the modulation controls. Here we have level controls for dry VCA and the low pass tremolo effect. And then we of course have controls for the filter and an output volume control. And there is one more thing in the middle here. It says sync LFO phases. And when you press it, it pretty much just restarts the phases of both LFOs at the same time. Okay, Rob, so I'm dying to know, why do you keep giving your apps away for free?
To a degree, it's just because they started off as being experiments with how iOS worked and how I could try to get UI elements to work in iOS, because I didn't just want to port the standard UIs I had from the desktop versions, because I figured that wouldn't do anything for the touch experience. So part of it was that. So the first couple of them I released just because I was getting used to it and I didn't want to charge people for it. But after the first couple of them, I had dealt with the App Store for long enough to realize it was going to be a pain to deal with supporting it and making sure I could handle customer interaction well enough to be happy with charging for them. I mean, we've seen some experiences big developers have with trying to support audio software, and it gets complicated trying to make sure that you can do updates correctly and make sure that people don't have broken versions of software. To me, the App Store makes that complicated enough. I didn't want to start charging for them, but I still wanted to put them out, so I just kept porting them. That's the basic reason. I just think the App Store model and the way they deal with developers makes it too difficult for an individual developer that doesn't want to spend a lot of time supporting it to deal with getting things where I'd be happy with the customer support I could offer.
Right, so this is basically a chorus/vibrato plugin, and you can switch between the two effects over here. And this is how you switch out modules wherever you find boxes with arrows on the sides. Now, as you can hear, this sounds a little bit mono-ish, so we're gonna add some modulation here on the filter by choosing a filter type, and then we're gonna add an LFO here, a sine LFO. That would actually sound good with some proper reverb on there. So let's just load up EOS 2. Yeah, that sounds very good. Now, there's a lot of fun to be had, and there aren't that many parameters to set up. All you have to do is to just recognize all the different sections, like the level controls in the middle here, the chorus vibrato section up here with its own modulation section, and then over here you have the filter with its own modulation section. And if we actually look at the filter and all of the filters available, you can see that there's a huge amount of them. And yeah, I'm just loving this, and it's all completely free. You know, out of all the apps that you publish so far, I think GyroVibe is my most favorite one.
That's the one I like the most. I primarily play guitar. And strangely enough, GyroVibe was actually written to emulate, to a degree, a Leslie from a B3. And then I started playing with it on guitar. I said, oh, okay, I like the way this works on guitar. I like the effect it has on guitar. So it's got basically the idea of the vibrato chorus kind of thing from a Hammond. And then it didn't quite juice it enough for what I wanted to hear. So then I put in the ability to sync a moving filter, which is where the other part of the sound from it comes. So it doesn't really sound like a Leslie anymore, but that was the inspiration. The icon is actually supposed to give you the idea of the tone wheel from a Hammond organ.
Now, there is this one effect in here called PhaserDelayArray, and in its description, Rob states that it's kind of a weird effect, and I thought that was funny, so I asked him about it, and you'll hear his answer after I just show you quickly what this thing actually sounds like. Right, so next up is the weird PhaserDelayArray. And again, if you want to control anything, just tap a box and then just slide the slider down here. And nice thing about PhaserDelayArray is that this thing has a randomizer too. And when you press it, it will just do weird things with all of the controls in here. Let's add a reverb to that, and it's a very nice, subtle, slightly dissonant texture to it. There's a lot of fun to be had with PhaserDelayArray, and it's not that hard to get to grips with because you've got the vibrato section over here, feedback section over here, then you've got an effect section with a panner, tremolo, ping pong, and chopper in it. And lastly, we have level controls, and also something that says before reverbs, before effects, after effects, and after feedback. And the reason to why this plugin is built this way, I'll just let Rob tell you about it.
I was playing around with reverberator sections, like the little chunk of code that you would use to make a reverb. And I had this weird thought that if I chain several of them together and then just use that kind of like a delay. So it basically is a delay, but instead of using a normal delay, it uses reverb sections for delays. And it's got several of them chained together. But what I found was that if I just did that, the signal would feedback too much and run away all the time. So that's why it has the section in it that is the effects section. So like if you put the tremolo on it or the chopper on it, then that tends to periodically kill the feedback. So the feedback won't build too much, but you can still treat it with full feedback.
A few years ago, I did this huge video that took me so long to make, about 25 free apps that you could download, anything from DAWs to drum machines to even reverbs. And the thing is, back then there weren't really any free reverb apps, but there was CuSnP. I didn't find any reverbs that were free in the App Store, but with this thing,
You definitely have a string reverb.
not a spring reverb.
No, a string reverb.
Originally, I was on a forum called Unfretted Guitar. It's all about fretless guitar playing. And so I wanted to have a sympathetic string emulator. So if you set it up basically like, say, a Sirode, then you can get the sympathetic vibrations coming in when you're on pitch with what you're trying to do. When you hit the notes correctly, you hear the sympathetics come up. In addition to that, it kind of emulates what you would get out of a sitar or a Sirode in how they're played. And so that's the real reason. So I wrote it for me and some of my friends over there. And that actually is one that goes back to the Mac 2. It used to be called X Resonance on the Mac. Now it's CuSnP because that kind of stands for phosphor bronze strings, which is what the idea was.
Now, we actually only have two more apps to have a look at, and those are LRC5 and LRC7. And Rob had something interesting to say about them when I asked him the question, what is the hardest thing with iOS development?
To me, the hardest thing about iOS development in general is discoverability of UI gestures. So making it so it's easy for a user to figure out what the controls are. I mean, when you have a normal keyboard interface, you have all sorts of command things and mouse things, but there's always easy secondary ways for people to figure out what they are. Like if you want to become an expert on using a word processor, all you have to do is go up into the menus and then you see what the command keys are and you can become very fast on it. On iOS, you don't have that easy discoverability. It's not like a 3-finger tap is obvious for someone to try. And then there's no way to say it in the UI. Oh, you click on this menu. Oh, you should have done this with a 3-finger tap. So that to me is the hardest thing about it, is making it so that the interface is discoverable and the user can get it without having to go into the manual, because no one likes to go into the manual. And you can see, like, when I went from LRC5 to LRC7, I put more into how you have to use long presses or double taps to get something to function. And it's much more difficult for people to figure out how to use it than it was just to use LRC5. LRC5 was already bad enough because you had to figure out the Q control is using a pinch. I mean, that's the thing, is discoverability of the user interface.
So the LRC plugins are basically multi-band EQs, and LRC5 has 5 bands, LRC7 has 7 bands, and LRC7 is the most latest plugin to have come out in the LRC series from Neon Silicon, and I think this is the one that Rob wants you to use. And there is a big difference in how these control. So if we look at LRC5 here, to control a node, you set your finger on it and you drag. And if you want to drag multiple nodes, you can actually do that by tapping on them, selecting them, making them green, and then you can move them around like this. You deselect them by tapping like that. Now, if we long press on a node, we get a menu. And here we have some fine-tuning options. So if I just exit here and show you right now how much this moves, well, if I drag my finger down here, you can see that it moves a square box like that, right? And same way, if I go up to that edge, it will move a whole box. And if I pull it down, enter the menu, choose Fine 10, which is very fine tuning, exit here, and I drag down to the edge again, you can see it does not move much. I'll actually have to do this plenty of times before it actually gets down a whole box. This is a nice way of fine-tuning stuff, and it's not really apparent unless you just feel like long pressing on something. Now, if we go down to LRC7, you can see that there are some gray nodes here, and that means that they're not activated. And if I try to drag on them, nothing will happen. But if we double tap on them, we will turn them on, and now we can drag on them. And doing that here feels very different. It's kind of almost as if the node has some inertia on it, like this. So it's very, very different from controlling stuff up in LRC5. Now, if we long press here, we do not get that fine-tuning menu, we get a filter menu instead, and here we can select between a wide variety of different filters. Set filter like that, and there you go. Now you have a new filter type that you can use. I also tried multi-selecting nodes for moving them, and that didn't work either in this one like it does in LRC5. Now, Rob did mention a pinching gesture, and that is when you set down 2 fingers and you basically do this. So if I do that, we can see that this pinching gesture basically sets the slope of the cue point for the filter. And that's not very obvious for a user to do. It's the same thing here in LRC7. If I do that, if I pinch and depinch, we can see that the slope changes based upon whether I'm pinching or depinching. And yeah, it's not that obvious for a user to do, and there really is no way to actually communicate this to the user. That is the problem. So how did you get into coding in the first place?
I kind of have a background in astronomy. In university, I started at the point everything you did in science took computing to do anything, and got heavier into it because my research was in galactic dynamics and simulating galaxies. And so that kind of led into the same kinds of math and programming that you would do with DSP. And so that's basically where I got started. Most of my programming has actually been more business-oriented stuff, but it still has that background in it that lets me play with the math to do signal processing.
I'm about to round this video up, but there is this one answer that Rob gave me about the meaning behind the name neon silicon. It turns out there is a very specific meaning behind it. But before I show you his answer, I just want to show you these. You see, I found out that Rob is a DIY builder. And a few years ago, he started building guitar pedals and also guitars. And I just had to have some pictures to show you because I am a DIY builder and I love this nerdy stuff. Right, so neon silicon, what does it mean?
It stands for, in my mind, new ground. When I decided to go to iOS and start developing things on iOS, I said, I could use the old name, but this is new ground. And I thought, oh, okay, neon silicon, which is also what the emblem thing I use for it. It's actually a superposition of the alchemical symbols for earth and air, which is new ground again, but it's also where silicon and neon come from. And since you're from Sweden, it's also got a thrown in little xTrem thing on the top, which is my nerd thing going through.
haQ attaQ Docutorials is what I like doing the most. I love highlighting people behind the tools that we use. And so I want to take this opportunity to thank Rob Abernethy for doing this interview with me. And I want to thank you, the audience, for watching it. And if you watched it to the end, you're amazing. Now you'll be able to find links to all of the apps discussed in this video down in the description and also in the pinned comment. And if you end up downloading one of Rob's apps and you end up liking it, or all of them maybe, then why don't you share some love with Rob? Now, if you like this type of content, then let me know that you do with a thumbs up and a comment down below. And if you don't like the content, if you don't like me, if you don't like my channel, then I have a gift for you. I can send it anywhere in the world. It comes from my butt. If you want to support me in a financial way, then go and check out my preset packs for Trooper, Synthesizer, and also Timeless 3. Links down below in the description and also in the pinned comment. And if you don't want to do that, you can check out my music. I prefer when people go to my Bandcamp and buy it from there. But if you don't want to do that, you can use some obscure streaming site called Spotify. Now, if you don't want to do that, I've got Patreon and PayPal. And if you don't want to do any of it, that's fine too. As usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.